Hello, I'm Tira Mitchell from Engraver.com, and I decided to do an interview today to try to break up the monotony of being housebound. And I called my good friend Scott Pilkington, and we're going to have a little discussion about choosing a project if you wanted to get into firearms, if you've been doing other things and wanted to start going that way. So, I will now introduce Scott Pilkington, and he can let you know a little bit about himself, and then we'll start our discussion. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Tira.
So tell us a little about yourself.
I've been engraving since I was about 17 years old. I did it full time as a living for almost 20 years, kind of involved in the air gun business for a while. And right now I'm sort of playing back into engraving full time. I've done a lot of teaching over the years. I've taught for GRS for 14 years. You could say I was a senior instructor out there because the program kind of built up under me over the years. I can say that I got to hire my friend Sam Alfano. So if there's any real claim to fame in the engraving world, it's I grabbed Sam and drug him into teaching because the first time I called him, he did not want to teach. Said it didn't interest him at all. And that's certainly been a change in the last 20 years because nearly everybody knows Sam. But anyway, I've been involved with FIGA since 1985 and fairly well comfortable with any skill required in the engraving world.
Okay. And you've done a little bit with the Olympic team as well, yes?
Yes, I've been on 2 Olympic teams as the gunsmith, 1996 in Atlanta and 2000 in Sydney. Also worked a lot of World Cups and World Championships around the world with the U.S. team, and that's really fascinating and fun. And I feel lucky and blessed to have had the opportunity to do those kind of things.
Okay. So if we have somebody who has been engraving for a while and has done knives maybe and jewelry and other projects and wants to think about doing their first firearm project, what would you tell them about picking that project? What size and scope would it be? Maybe just for basic scrolls at first, even.
Well, I would recommend trying to get a small gun, and especially when you're in these stages as a progressing beginner, a progressing novice, you need to do a project to completion, finish it, because every time you do a drawing and you cut the scroll from your drawing and look at the other side and do the next side, you're learning all the time, it seems. One of the things that we see quite frequently with bigger guns and new engravers is the scroll style will change 3 or 4 times across the surface of the gun as they figure out how things roll with the rotation of the vise and things. Some things work better than others as you go along. So this is why I say get a small project, a small gun, and do it, complete it, learn what you can, go to the next one. Knives are excellent to do this on because they do turn over very fast.
And you would define small as a small revolver, a small
revolver,
1911, Derringer. What's small to you?
Something like a small revolver, a J-frame maybe, J-frame Smith & Wesson, or a lot of folks are engraving the Bond Derringers. Those are nice, good quality Derringer. There's a lot of really cheap Derringers that you can buy that serve as a good canvas for a beginner too. I would say, of course, a lot of people like to engrave the little North American Arms mini revolvers, and those are really small because, they're about this big. The only problem with those is they're rather hard. The metal, both in the frame and the cylinders, can be extremely hard. So they're not for the faint of heart. I wouldn't really recommend a beginner do one of those. But like a small the Henry rifles. Of course, it's a little bit bigger probably than some of the pistols we were just talking about, but it's a good gun with soft metal. That's a pretty small canvas, and typically you're probably going to put bigger scrolls in there that would be appropriate to that style gun. So the engraving should go fairly quick on something like the Henrys.
Okay. And as far as if you don't know that much about firearms, are there parts that are typically engraved and parts that are typically not touched on a gun so that a beginner doesn't put scrolls somewhere that they're going to really have trouble with right off the bat?
Yes, that's a multi-part question, but
In
most people,
general.
when they hear about gun engraving, they think, "Oh my gosh, that's going to be really hard metal." And for the most part, uh, guns aren't that hard to engrave. Most of the parts of most guns. There are notable exceptions, but just for reference, for a lot of jewelry people that are engravers coming out of the jewelry world, 14 karat gold and certainly 10 karat gold is harder than most steel that you'll encounter in gun engraving projects. So it's very relative, but there are parts of the gun that are hardened because they do have a lot of wear. Things like triggers, hammers, certain parts of the slide, and some of these things you kind of learn by experience. You mentioned 1911s a little bit ago. Those are a well-known canvas for engravers because you got those beautiful flat surfaces, and 1911s are probably one of the most famous pistols in the world. Uh, and that is what I would call a larger handgun. Um, but if you look where the slide stop notch is in the slide, and I've got I have one here, but usually you can see a little bit of discoloration right there in the bluing because that little notch is hardened. And if you're trying to engrave right up to it, you can just be cutting along, have a beautiful chip coming up, and all of a sudden, wham, you stop, or maybe even break your tip, and you're nodding your head like you've done this
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. Well, I've seen where that part is harder. Yes.
And so you've either got to learn to kind of move your pattern around to avoid such places, uh, or be prepared to sharpen and bust your way through it however long it takes you to get through those little areas. Ideally, you want to avoid them. Like I said, a hammer on a gun, typically, you probably wouldn't engrave that. Certainly not starting out. I mean, if you're doing a full bore, over the top custom gun, you're probably going to engrave everything that you can see or incorporate it into the scene somehow. And in those cases, people are going to heat treat the gun to anneal, or those parts to anneal them to get them soft enough that you can work on them, and then reheat treat them afterwards so that they're safe and function as they should be.
Okay. And as far as once you've gotten through your first gun and you've learned a lot of stuff, now maybe if you want to put scenes in or start to go that way, what would the next progression be then for somebody who wants to try the next level?
Um, well, picking a scene should be appropriate to the gun in some means. Um, and probably as a beginner, you're going to get specific projects thrown at you in certain ways. A lot of police officers seem like they hear you're an engraver. Well, hey, you can engrave my gun. And honestly, the first gun I ever engraved was for a local chief of police. And a lot of times that what they'll want is a copy of their badge on their firearm. And so that's kind of appropriate because you're putting the symbol of their career on the gun, which is a major part of their career. You might also see quite often on a similar type handgun, be it revolver or automatic, like a family crest, or maybe a monogram with the owner's initials, or A lot of times guns are given as gifts, so whoever's getting the gun given to them would have their initials engraved on it. I mean, that's appropriate because it's going to be their personal item. I mean, to get a little further abroad, you know, there's certain scenes that you would think about putting on certain guns. Excuse me. The Colt Single Action Army that we're all familiar with from cowboy movies and whatnot, associated with the West and all the cowboy movies and Western dramas and fast draw in the streets. And so those are quite frequently engraved with themes from the West. And normally the style of scroll that was on those guns, engraved from Colt at the time from the factory and other contemporary engravers, usually was a big open scroll that we associate with those guns. And so it's appropriate to engrave Western themes on Colt Single Action Armies, whereas putting something like
an airplane.
Yeah, an airplane or something. It wouldn't be. It would clash with the historical background of the gun. So, and then like we were talking about 1911s. 1911s, you know, they were originally used in World War I. That was the straight 1911. The 1911 A1 came out prior to World War II, and so there's a lot of historical significance of World War II, Korea, Vietnam with the 1911 A1, as opposed to just the pure 1911 that was only used in World War I. So if you were going to do World War I themes, you would want to make sure all the gun had only 1911 parts on it. Lee Griffiths did a very nice gun a few years ago with World War I scenes on the 1911. PPKs are a quite common handgun, and you know it's a small handgun that a lot of people have engraved. And of course, the PPK has two real major significances. First, it was a gun of the Nazi era, and a lot of the German officers used them, carried them. And there's a blue million fakes associated with various members of the Nazi party, all the way up to the infamous leader. And a few genuine articles of that nature, but that gun's, you know, got a lot of cultural association with World War II and the Germans. And later, the James Bond films, James Bond carried a PPK and really made it famous all over again to a new generation of people all around the world. So the 19 or the PPK get a lot of all sorts of things because of James Bond, but what I would say, it's not really appropriate to put, you know, there's a lot of fakes of the Nazi world trying to make it look like it belonged to a particular officer, and some of those guns bring $100,000, $200,000, and even ones that were found out as fakes, revealed as fakes later.
Yeah, so stay away from doing those types of things.
Go do a whole Nazi theme glorifying the Nazi period just because it wouldn't be appropriate for most people. They wouldn't want to see that.
Okay, and what about game scenes, like for different caliber or guns, or you know, how do you deal with matching those types of things up?
Very good point. I mean, if you've got like a 22 rifle, you're probably going to put something like squirrels or groundhogs on it. Game that would be appropriate to be shot with that gun. If it's a 22 rifle, you're not going to put elephants and lions and African hunting scenes on there. You would save those for calibers that we would associate with African safaris, like 416 Rigby or 375 H&H or something of that nature. Um, it's the same thing with revolvers. If it's a 22 revolver, you might put squirrels or butterflies or something small, dainty to the frame. You're probably not going to put bigger animals like bears or whatnot on a small frame revolver, but a bigger revolver, say 44 caliber, something like a Super Black Hawk or an end frame Smith and Wesson. Maybe you're going to put bears or tigers or whatever on there that's a bigger animal.
Okay. I got a couple of questions also. What about historical associations with certain guns or certain actions that are different than the ones that you kind of mentioned, cowboys and the Western guns? And are there any other ones that you can think of that would be?
Well, several. I've got some pieces here to show you. But let's talk. Well, I hadn't really mentioned shotguns at all, but
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
shot. Typically, we think of using a shotgun for hunting flying birds, doves, quail, ducks, geese, and you very seldom see scenes that involve like the Western scenes, cowboy themes, like we were talking about on Colt Single Action Armies. You wouldn't normally put that on a shotgun, but in like the Cowboy Action Shooting Society or Single Action Shooting Society, they have a lot of folks are using the shotguns like would have been appropriate to have been on a stagecoach or something. So those stagecoach type shotguns, it would be appropriate to put Western scenes on those, whereas most shotguns you wouldn't consider doing that. I spoke a little bit about the PPKs, and I've got an interesting project here that's been going on the last few months with the engraver Sue Afon, who's been here at my house. We were just out in Las Vegas at the custom gun show out there. And this particular gun, and it's actually, we're still finishing it up. So I don't know what we can see here, but this is it's just not going to get in focus. I don't know why. Anyway, this is a PPK frame. This particular PPK was made, you can read that. It's done on the theme by Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War. And this particular copy of the PPK was made by the Chinese Army in 1952. It's actually a very rare gun in the United States because we just didn't have that much association with China until the last 15, 20 years. And PPKs became illegal to import into this country under the 1968 GCA. And so PPKs that existed outside of this country, and particularly the Chinese ones, just are very rare. Most of them probably came over here as Vietnam War bringbacks. But in this case, we're doing a complete Chinese theme because it was a specific gun made by the Chinese Army. And we're doing historical scenes, famous battles from China over the centuries. And actually, the added bonus was having Ifan Su to do the engraving. He's an engraver from China, so it's kind of a trifold of appropriateness for this particular gun. Whereas doing this type of Chinese work on a Nazi era PPK probably wouldn't be the thing to do. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, to consider what what was going on in the world when the gun was being used primarily, and then trying to fit that in. Now, I guess my follow-up question with that would be, when you have the customer that comes with one gun type and wants something very different than that a normal person would associate with it, what do you do then? Is it, I mean, I guess the customer is mostly right. Obviously,
There's the
I,
man.
I don't I don't put certain things on my projects because I refuse to engrave them, certain symbols and those types of things. But assuming they're not asking for that, what would you do?
We've there's the mantra that the customer is always right, but then again, as you say, we have our personal beliefs, things that we're not going to do or promote by creating symbolisms or embellishing history to make something look better than it was. So, that's a question of
So
you deal with your customer to say, no, that's not me. That's not who I'm just not going to do that. If you know somebody that might, maybe you recommend somebody else, but you could always try to sway them into something else that you see as making more sense. Actually, I was just speaking to a client a couple of days ago, and he's got a 1911 that was made by a particular man in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's called Aculon. There's Travis Strahan. He's been dead a few years now, but it was a unique locking system to make the gun extremely accurate. And he wanted some over the top engraving, but wanted to know what made sense to him. And we were discussing using Chattanooga themes. Chattanooga is a very famous tourist city, Rock City, all the barns, Sea Ruby Falls, the Battle of Chickamauga and famous Civil War battle there. And there's a lot of history and interesting tourist things. And maybe we were just going to do a Chattanooga theme gun like the Colt Collectors Society does when they usually have their auction gun based on whatever state they're holding their annual meeting in that year with landmarks from that state. I don't know where we started off with the question.
well,
Did I?
yeah, yeah. I mean, the question was, when you have that customer that brings in the clay shooting gun, shotgun, and they want the Western scene or whatever, but they're like, it's my gun, that's what I want. So, just any words of wisdom there. But
Yeah. Well,
customer is always right to a point, I guess.
probably more of a question of a Dale Carnegie course than engraving themes, but I mean, some customers you can persuade to go a particular way, and
Not so much.
And that's just a dynamic between the personality of your customer and your personality, I would guess.
Okay. And how about things like peripheral things, the grips on the gun, how it's displayed, any of that? Do you have any thoughts on any of those types of things as people progress in their engraving career and want to do fancier and fancier work, let's say?
I do, and we can go back to this red box here. When I was trying to decide how we were going to fit a box for this particular gun and what things should be inside the box, I've actually got a Chinese Army oil can that, again, I'm not sure why my camera's not focusing like it should, but it's got Chinese characters for oil and cleaning solvent. But the interior of the box, well, we started out, I looked and looked for boxes. This particular box is a leather bound box from the Qing Dynasty. You can see where the leather was sewn on, and it's carved and painted leather. And then, of course, I had to fit the insides. What kind of material would I use for the inside? Well, what do you associate with China? Silk. What color do you associate with China? Red. I mean, what other thing can I put here? I probably could have done another color of silk, but red looks good. And this particular gun, and of course, you see a lot of grips that are done appropriate to the gun. You might use a particular wood in the stock that's native to a certain state or associated with certain areas. Used to, we saw a lot of ivory grips on gun. Ivory was a very precious material for many things used throughout our culture all over the world. And guns were certainly, your grips on guns certainly saw a lot of ivory work. And actually, ivory would sort of be appropriate for China because the Chinese did use a lot of ivory too. The particular gun, the grips that we did on this Chinese gun, we made out of bronze. Because, if you're familiar with Chinese art, you're familiar with all the bronze work that they did for cooking utensils and all sorts of ornamental things, weapons of war. Of course, the Chinese invented the gunpowder. They actually invented the first handguns. And again, I don't know if we can see it in this picture. This is the trigger guard of this gun, and this piece here is what's called a hand cannon. It was really the first pistol.
Can you bring that a little closer? The picture.
I'm trying.
Okay.
Again, this is the trigger guard of the gun. So we are between me and Fawn. I don't know. There's the brass grip that was carved out of wax initially. It was cast by Paul Hamler, and then Fawn did. Of course, in this particular picture, I don't know how you can see it, but it doesn't have the scales engraved on it. He did this after this picture was made, and then the grips were patinaed to a deep green color, like you would see bronze or brass turn age over time. So it looks really ancient. So that's kind of something neat that this gun has, where the grips were picked specifically for it. But mostly it's going to be something more appropriate. I mean, you may have a person bring you the gun and that you want a monogram or something put on it, or they're going to make grips out of some wood that came from their great grandmother's house. That makes it really a family heirloom that ensures it gets passed down from generation to generation. But that's some of the peripheral things that help tie the things together.
Okay. Are there any guns that people should stay away from? I know, like with certain knives and other things, sometimes things are just so inexpensive that they're not worth spending, 100 hours on, in a way. Do you have any words of wisdom for people as in that vein?
Well, let me answer that question in two different ways. Earlier in the conversation, I was thinking of this. I mean, when we're talking about the hardness of certain guns, there are guns that the whole gun is known to be hard. 1903 Springfields, Model 21 Winchesters are a couple that immediately come to mind. I think I mentioned the North American Arms mini revolvers. And some guns, the mini revolvers can be cut. They're just a pain to cut. Some guns, like a Ruger Red Label shotgun. Here comes Yvonne. We're live with Tira. You want to say hello to the engravers of the world?
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Are you having a broadcast?
Yeah.
Yes, we're live right now. So everything you may or may not say is being captured, including your image. So just know that.
Okay.
You want to tell them anything about the theme that was chosen on this gun?
You're doing better than me. I heard you.
You heard me.
I can't wait to see it live. I can't wait to see the gun together live.
Well, I hope for today or tomorrow's over with, we'll have the French Grand done and get this gun put together. It's a knockout gun. The whole thing's just really super.
Cool.
Anyway, you want to talk about anything about it? What did it mean to you as a Chinese working on a gun that had all this Chinese history?
That's a long story. I need to prepare for that.
Okay, well, we can do another interview for that.
Questions off the cuff. Why not you?
It's so complicated. It involves thousands of years of history, and it's art form in China. I really do need to prepare for that.
Well, I mean, there are the scrolls that are on this gun are Chinese scrolls, and he sculpted them in a Chinese way.
Okay, well, it would be fascinating if
We
you
could
spend a little time thinking about that, and then we could just do an expose about this particular project and all the elements, and we can work on getting the high def pictures and things. That would be really cool.
And it involves a lot of stories and the way I think how to put the idea on the design work. And in many places, I've changed a lot of designs, changed many versions of the design because of some particular reasons, and the story behind those reasons. It's complicated.
And I would probably enjoy hearing some of that myself.
Yeah. Okay, well, maybe do we have people for next week, right? Or we'll give you a call. We'll work on a schedule if you're interested in doing that. That would be great.
Yeah, one of our commenters has just asked for an interview, a special interview.
Okay. Yeah, we've had a commenter ask for a special interview just about that engraving. So that would be very neat. It would be good to get to know you and the project even more. Scott's has told us quite a bit, but it would be great to get to know more.
Okay, well, so we'll work on getting that back together. Back to which guns should we avoid? I was going to say, if you go like on the Engravers Cafe or Lindsay's Forum, there's specific list of specific guns that are known to be hard that an engraver should try to avoid if at all possible, or at least at least be able to tell his customer that, this gun's going to be hard. I'm going to be sharpening my engraver every 20 minutes. Going to have a lot more time in it. You need to charge appropriately to engrave a hard gun. So there's lists on the two resources I just mentioned of the commonly known guns. These days, of course, Glocks are quite popular, and Glocks are known for having really hard slides. And there are ways to anneal those slides and deal that, but most people don't want to get involved or take on the liability of something like that. And so I would just say in that case, I do know that there's aftermarket slides made for the Glocks that are softer and are easier to engrave. And many people purchase those and engrave them when they're going to do something decorative on a Glock. And the other side of what kind of guns are appropriate to engrave, there's the old story about making a silk purse from a sow's ear. There's a lot of very cheap firearms that the materials are cheap, the fit and function are cheap. They're just not really appropriate to having a highly ornate work done on them. again, you may have somebody come to you for sentimental reasons. They want some family heirloom engraved, and it wouldn't make sense financially to engrave it under normal sense, but because it means so much to them personally, they want to spend the time and effort on it. That's fine. But you know, you wouldn't put a $3,000 engraving on a $200 gun normally. And there's, particularly if you're trying to do a high-end project, and I actually kind of saw this last week in Las Vegas. There was a gun that was submitted for Master's project that had a lot of, you could see the mill marks present in the gun from the factory, and like some parts where things were rolled and the metal was swirled up, and it wasn't really a good flat clean surface. It would have been better if they had started out with maybe a better gun, or at least taken the time to use sandpaper. And there's, you know, that's worthy of its own discussion, metal finish and prepping a gun prior to engraving, to take out all of the machine marks out of the gun so that you're working truly on a flat surface. Or even if it's the area that the gun's not engraved, but you look and you see the machine marks in a gun in a flat area or unengraved area, it still just kind of cheapens the whole product. Because you want the finish all the way across the gun to be as beautiful as the engraving work you're putting on it. So in that case, you know, there's certain guns that I would recommend you stay away from. The fit and finish that's on them, or at least if you're going to do them, do the fit and finish work yourself to make it more appropriate for the engraving work. And then there's another area that's sort of a danger. And sometimes if you're cutting deep in a gun, there's like thin little pocket areas that might be milled through from the backside. And if you're cutting a little deep, you could actually cut into a hollow area of the gun, and then you're like saying really bad words when that happens.
How do you know, other than the second time you have that same model gun, how do you know? How would a person who doesn't have that much?
There is some discussions, notations of these kinds of danger areas on the cafe, probably in the same list where the hard guns are. Hadn't seen it sometime, but there's some, particularly with some of the many custom knives that you see these days, and you can, especially ones that got like trick actions or flip actions, spring assist or whatever they call them. Some of those have engraved pocket or machine pockets in them, and you can get in trouble with some knives if you don't know. And it almost takes an instinct to think that they might be there, or it probably just takes a little experience, which is how a lot of us learn lots of things.
Thank God for the laser welder now.
And you got any doubts about how it's put together inside, and it's a custom knife that the maker's around, it's worth a phone call to call the maker up and ask, is there anything in there I should be aware of if you're going to be cutting very deep at all? I mean, even cut back, you can pop into some. Never had that happen to me, of course. Never. No, sir.
Okay. Is there any other thing that you would like to say about this topic before we kind of tell everybody how to get in touch with you or me and sign off?
Well, I would like to say it just takes some research about some of these things. You know, the internet's a wonderful thing to learn about. You got to wade through a bunch of junk, but you can find a lot of junk pretty easily too that tells you what you need to know about hardnesses of guns or difficulties or appropriateness to certain things. And certainly the groups on Facebook or the groups, I really still love the forums like the Engravers Cafe and the Lindsay Forum. And there's so much good information that's on there that's just been asking repeatedly, and so many of the masters around the world have spoken on all these subjects. Those are just fantastic resources, so I would recommend using them if I was going to do that.
Okay. And you also run the Engrave-In, which I know right now is, like most things in the country, we're having a scheduling issue. But
scheduling issue, that's what it is.
But in general, where would people follow or find information on the Engrave-In to know when it may or may not happen?
Well, there's a Facebook page for the Engrave-In for the 2020 Engrave-In that if you go to my Scott Pilkington Jr. account, you should be able to find it under my events. That's still scheduled for the 20th of April, but that was originally scheduled around NRA show, and that's no longer in the picture. So really had decided what we're going to do with the Engrave-In. So it'll be posted there. I'll post an announcement like on the cafe and Lindsay's forum to announce what's happening with it there as well.
Okay.
Or if you need to, call me or email me or whatever.
Okay. And as far as either following you or getting in touch with you, do you have an Instagram? I know you told us your Facebook page. Do you have a website? Any other contacts for people if they want to get a hold of you?
My Instagram is Quality Has No Regrets. But admittedly, I don't post on there very often. I have two major websites, pilkguns.com, PILKGUNS, or I also have learntoengrave.com, and you can go that with the 2 being TO or the 2 being the number 2. And there's a lot of resources on there for an engraver. But yeah, that's probably the best way to chase me down or learn something about me.
Okay. And if you want to get in touch with me,
Secrets of Engraving. And
I'm
there's
sorry.
cool interviews of engravers and works, and actually Sue Lafon that was just here. There's a 38-minute video where he got his master's here in the United States a few years ago. That a lot of cool, interesting stuff in there about engraving techniques and things.
Okay. And if you want to get a hold of me, it's Tira@engraver.com. My Instagram is Tira.Mitchell, and also PulseGraver on Instagram as well. So, well, Scott, I hope to see you soon. I hope we can get this Instagram thing worked out and everybody will be traveling soon.
Okay. I enjoyed visiting with you, Tira, and again, hope to see you soon.
Yep. Thanks for the interview. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.